28, 29,
You know
42.
I can't count that high. You got to stop that, Doc. It's just not nice. All right. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies, a place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. So without further ado, we're going to dive into the episode. And if you notice, Doc, I almost said sweatshop because it's so dang hot with my broken AC, but boy, I restrained myself barely.
That's why you don't live in the boonies.
Well, I mean, I survived a year in a desert, well, actually 2, and I don't know how I did it at this point because I'm such a streaking violet now when it comes to the heat.
I survived the first 8 years of my life in a desert. Wah, wah, wah.
Yes, but I did it wearing body armor, so I win.
I did it with my mom locking me out of the house.
Okay, maybe we'll call it a tie then. I knew I liked your mom for a reason. All right, somebody's got to. All right, so before we get started, John, Mr. John Babb, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers?
Not much to tell. I'm a pharmacist by training. Did emergency response, worked for the Surgeon General for a number of years, emergency planning and deployments, that sort of thing.
All right, so you played with the good drugs.
So he's so casual about what is actually, to me, a really cool job.
He played with the good drugs. That's what he's telling you people. So if you want your characters to get high, you reach out to him. He'll tell you how to do it, theoretically.
Some of my pharmacist time was spent in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, but I got to go home every night.
Yeah, that's probably the better end of the deal.
In fact, some of my characters come from those days.
I believe it. All right.
When I say bad guys, they really were bad guys.
All right. So the next part of the introduction, dear listener, if you've been here before, you know the drill, is how we first found them. So I actually found John when he reached out to me because he had heard that I'd interviewed William before and asked, hey, can we come on the show to talk about the series I'm writing in that universe? And so I said yes. But Doc, I suspect you knew him because you seem to know all the authors in the world.
No, this is the first time I've met John, and I'm really excited to because, you know,
you can nerd out on
he likes chemicals as much as I do.
Fine.
From a purely interesting point of view, not a weird one, JR.
I wasn't going to go there, but so I just figured you knew all the authors because I was at the bookstore with the youngest because he wanted to get his more picture books. He calls it manga or something weird, whatever.
Manga.
He wanted his picture books, and so while he's looking, I was looking at the fantasy sci-fi section of Barnes and Noble. You can hear him downstairs screaming, "It's not a picture book!" I was at the sci-fi and fantasy side. I'm like, I met him, I met her, and then I started thinking about it. I'm like, Doc probably knows more of the ones that I didn't. So I don't know. It was a weird little
I will not deny the truth. It's really fun when you work at Barnes and Noble and you get to shelve books and you're like, oh, cool, I know this person's book. And then there was more than one time when I texted somebody and going, you didn't tell me your book was out. It doesn't release for a week. How do you have it already? I'm like, I don't technically have it. My work has it.
Fair enough. All right. The next part of the introduction is we have a returning guest. But if you didn't listen to episode 34, what are you doing with your life? Hit pause, go back and listen to it, and then come back. But
no, JR, don't tell them to go away. We're going to.
No, they go to a different episode and then come back. So they would still be listening to our episode.
You are relying too much on people who may be ADD.
Fair point. All right, listen to this one.
And they can circle back afterwards.
Right, they can circle back afterwards. Got it. But Mr. William Webb, can you introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers?
You know, if you tell them to go away and they know I'm on the show, they may not come back. Yes, I am William Allen Webb. I write science fiction, fantasy, and all that kind of good stuff. And I also write military history.
The good stuff. So the next part of the introduction, dear listener, as we've done this before, is how we first found them. And William and I were in a story bundle together back in the beginning of the 2021. And so we interviewed him and everyone else in the story bundle. 14 interviews in 7 days. I was going insane. But we got it all done. And William,
I think there was a pandemic going on, so you weren't doing anything else.
This is true. I mean, I could have been staring out my window or going for a walk. Not much changed for us here in Tidewater. But yeah, so we were in a story bundle together, and that's how we first met. And I knew we'd have him back because he was a lot of fun. But Doc, are you going to tell me you didn't meet him at a bar too? Because you meet everyone at the bar.
I did not meet him at a bar, but drinking was involved.
Okay, you get a redemption there. Okay.
Because Marisa was telling me about him, and she and I were drinking. Does that count?
Drinking by proxy, yes, we'll accept.
No. We were actively drinking, but I met him by proxy through Marisa.
Right, but alcohol was still involved, so it counts.
Well, of course, it was Marisa.
Were you at LibertyCon last year? Last one?
I'm always at LibertyCon because
Well, see, we met there.
LibertyCon.
We met there.
Probably. I just sometimes meet people 3 or 4 times, like before I.
She was in her defense, William. She was probably also 3 sheets to the wind.
Well, now I wasn't going to go there, but
Depends on where I was.
It
if
was
I'm
in the
bar. I'm sober.
It was in the con suite.
Yeah, the con suite. You see a bunch of faces, and I'm checking a bunch of people's IDs, and then sometimes when people are in costumes, they don't really match their IDs.
Yeah. Well, she checked mine, and I wasn't in costume. So.
All right.
See, I met him serving bar.
Yeah.
So, Doc, we're going to ask them the religion question so we decide if they get to stay. But when you ask for the first one, we get to see if they know what they all have in common. These were specifically curated for these 2 authors.
JR likes to think he's smart. Sometimes he's too smart for his own good. So,
I had a sergeant once or twice tell me that.
Yeah, they weren't wrong. So, our sci-fi religion: Total Recall, Blade Runner, Minority Report.
Tell who you're asking first.
Who are you asking?
Who are you asking first?
Whichever one wants to answer first.
Oh, I'll let John.
Okay.
I got to go with Total Recall. Part of the story has to do with not really knowing whether what you remember is real or it's imagined. And I think for instance, have that same problem. Sometimes I'll have a thought and wonder, was that from a real experience, or did I dream that, or what? Plus, I don't like Tom Cruise, and the idea of him playing the character in his newest movie is repellent to me.
Fair. So with the memories,
Tom Cruise is kind of like, he's a gnome.
Yes, he is.
Do you not like gnomes?
Exactly.
So the other part of that is you have memories. People tell you stuff that happened to you that you might not remember, and then you think you remember because you've heard the story so many times.
Right.
All right. Now, William, what about you?
Oh, I'm a Blade Runner guy.
And do you know what all 3 of those had in common?
No.
They were all short stories written by Philip K. Dick that were turned into movies.
Oh, of course. I mean, I did. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that, but I thought you were talking about the movies, and I was trying to think, same director? No. So, yeah.
I wouldn't know who directed it. I'm lucky if I know who the stars are.
We're lucky he knows what the movies are.
Yeah, my theory has always been if the actor is so bad at their job that I don't think of them as the character, I think of them as them, then they messed up anyway, and it probably wasn't a good movie.
Yeah.
But I also don't watch a lot of TV. I read books and watch documentaries because I'm cool like that.
Mel made me watch Free Guy, and that was actually really good.
Mel makes you do a lot of things. She's a good influence on you.
Sure, we'll go with that.
All right, the next one, Doc.
So our next one, and we're going to go with Bill first. Pirates of the Caribbean, The Golden Compass, or Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Oh, Journey to the Center of the Earth. Absolutely. Pirates of the Caribbean's fine. I don't have a problem with Johnny Depp. I'm not sure how much I love movies based on Disney rides, but if you're going to do it, that one was pretty good. But I mean, Jules Verne. And then again, I also grew up with Pellucidar.
Okay.
Which and you guys probably know that was Edgar Rice Burroughs' version of that, where you go into the Earth at the Earth's core and all that kind of stuff. So I like Hollow Earth kind of stories.
There is a really neat RPG out there that I know somebody working on you'll love, because that's kind of the concept. Subterranean. We interviewed Jay Parker about it. I'll send you the link. But
Okay,
it was
please do.
really, because that's kind of the entire concept behind it, and he's working on it with Flint Dilley.
And they have DARPA got a DARPA, one of the X prizes, trying to develop ways to actually live underground and in subterranean environments.
I think DARPA's trying to develop everything.
This is probably also true.
Derpa.
Yes.
Right. I'm sorry. I think it's funny. I have a bad sense of humor.
It's part of your charm.
Sure, we'll go with that. So, as you guys know, we love both science and fantastical fantasies, but which was your first love, John? Sci-fi or fantasy?
It's got to be science plus a little fi thrown in. But if it's not believable, it doesn't meet the bar for me. So this is what I write about. I write stuff that's true, set in a situation that has to be believable, or I'm not going to write it.
I can understand that. I have found that if I spend most of my time correcting their science, then I don't enjoy the story.
You better write your science correctly, because there's a whole lot of people out there that will tell you how wrong you are on point X and Y.
Well, with the internet now, all it takes is a good 5 minutes to become an actual scientific expert, right?
That's true.
Only
Well,
if you believe the Twitter comments.
Dr. Google. Yeah.
There is a liquor store near my house that has a sign last year around they've done it several years now, but at graduation time, congratulations, thank Google. So, well, how about you, Webb?
I'm an old school fantasy guy, and I say that, I mean, I grew up with Heinlein and the Juveniles and all that, but when my mom told me that I was forbidden to read Lord of the Rings, because
what was she trying to do? Force you to read it?
No, I was reading it. She told me I was forbidden to do it, and because her friend of hers told her that Tolkien was a communist, and so she freaked out, and of course he was a conservative Catholic, but she forbade me to do it. So I said, well, okay, I know what I'm going to do now. And I read it 32 times before I got to college, had it memorized. So that was a gateway to all the really hard stuff. Robert E. Howard, Michael Moorcock, all that. And,
that is fair.
Yeah. So, but it was The Hobbit that ruined my life, so to speak. Otherwise, I would have probably done something useful.
You know what? I find good books to be useful. So
it's like Heinlein said after he sold his first story. Why didn't somebody tell me about this before? It's a lot better than working.
Fair enough. So what was your first memory in engaging in speculative fiction as a genre? We'll start with Bill and switch to John that way.
My first what?
What was your first memory engaging with this speculative fiction, whether it be science fiction or fantasy?
The first thing that I don't actually remember reading Lord of the Rings when I was probably 13 or so. But I do remember sometime around then reading my first Conan story. And I don't remember which one it was. I just remember, to my 13-year-old mind, it had this big guy with this bloody sword and all these, good-looking girls around him. And I thought, okay, this really seems like it's cut out for me.
I mean, I can definitely appreciate that.
Yeah. And, Howard wrote he wrote for 14-year-old boys. I mean, he just did. That's who was buying the pulps that were paying him, 14 to 20-year-old boys and then older men. And so and it really just spoke to me. I think he's an underappreciated genius.
I can agree with that.
How about you, John? What was your first memory engaging in speculative fiction, whether it
Yeah.
be fantasy or science?
1984, Brave New World, Doctor Strangelove, or How I Learned to Love the Bomb.
Excellent movie.
And they had enough truth in them, despite being fiction, that's what kept me in the book.
That is awesome.
I want to throw out one more since John was mentioning those movies. A movie that's kind of now forgotten in a book that was just superb was On the Beach.
Yeah.
By Neville Shute. And
okay, because to me that's just a drink.
It's a post-apocalyptic novel written in the 50s about the survivors of a nuclear war.
Okay.
And very low key, great movie, great acting, really, really, really good stuff.
That sounds really neat. I will have to check it out because I like watching some of those older movies, particularly that's something my dad and I do over the holidays together.
It's truly a classic.
So what is it that you love about speculative fiction as a genre? John, or should I let Bill go first so you have time to think?
For me, although it's fiction, as I've said previously, as long as I can draw parallels to something that's true, then I'm fine. And for example, Bill's got this fantastic series of 5 books, The Last Brigade Universe, and I'm talking over his stuff here, but it's all true, except for one premise. And if you can get past that one premise, then it's true. It's a beautiful piece of work.
Don't look at me and expect me to, contradict him.
So, Bill, what's your favorite thing about the genre of speculative fiction?
The hard part is narrowing it down to one thing. It's just such an all-encompassing thing that I truly think that men, women, mankind is born to entertain each other with stories. And there's an example in a book I'm writing now. It's a nonfiction book. I'm doing it with Chris Kennedy. And one of the things I begin with is the oldest known cave paintings in the world that appear to use what we would consider fantasy creatures are from 41,000 BC. And I like to think that person, whoever they were, was entertaining their friends with stories painted on a wall. And it's just that whole freedom of anything you can make believable and entertain and thrill or scare or whatever your point is, other people is just, there's something magical about it. And I don't mean magic in the fantasy sense, in the engagement sense. Real quick, the most exciting thing I've ever done as far as storytelling is I used to go to a summer camp, and it was a 3-week session. When I was 17, my last year, I'd read Lord of the Rings so many times that every night around the campfire, I would relate part of the books to everybody else from memory. And, you can't tell every word and all that, but and after about a week, it was, come on, let's go. We want to hear it. Come on, let's go. We want to hear the next part. And so you had all these 13 to 16-year-old guys who normally wouldn't care about this kind of stuff bugging me to get around the campfire and tell them the story. And I think that's probably the first time I realized the power of storytelling. And that's what I'm really in love with.
Okay, that's a good answer. we clearly need more campfires in our lives.
We do.
Most of my campfire experiences, you would have thought we were stoners the way we were waxing about nonsense, trying to sound philosophical.
You probably don't want, you probably don't want one right now.
No, I'm dying, but it's okay. We'll overcome. All
You're
right. So
inside the campfire
yes. So how did your love of
right now.
Yes, I am. So how did your love of speculative fiction transition into you writing stories in this space? And we'll start with you, John.
Well, one of my jobs when I worked for the Surgeon General was to talk about and train other people as to what might happen if such and such should occur. And one of my favorite stories is when I went to a meeting of managers of the Food and Drug Administration and told them, and I got up front there and I said, I'm going to tell you a scenario. Well, about half the audience didn't hear that first sentence. And so then I launched into this tale about what was going on in New Mexico with dairy cattle and how they had terrorists had come in there and damaged the milk. And within about 15 minutes, everybody in the audience was hitting their cell phones, phoning people in New Mexico to find out what the heck's going on down there. Why didn't we know about it, etc. And it can, if you tell it the right way, it can be pretty compelling. So that's what I did a lot. Not just that one story, but Sowing Chaos is full of about 40 different kinds of attacks on America. Not huge attacks at all at one time, except for the very last one. But over time, they built up and really tore the country down. And most of them came from what I did 10 years ago at work.
Okay.
See, I told you that's probably the coolest job we've had on here.
All right. What about you, William? How did you go from reading and loving the speculative fiction space to deciding you would be a teller of tales?
I think, it's really hard to remember. I was in my teens, and like most people do, I didn't have fanfic back then to get started. So I had to just write things, and I'm sure they were very derivative and that kind of stuff. And when I got to college, I wanted to continue that. And so I majored in creative writing. But again, I think it just goes back to that experience of, a lot like John, I realized what happens when you tell a story and you're really entertaining about it, that people just really enjoy it. And, I got to tell you what, one of my favorite rock and roll singers describes himself this way, and I think it applies to most writers. He says he's just an insecure little show-off. And I think that applies to me. I like people to read the stories and enjoy them, and it makes me feel good, and I'm sure it inflates my ego more than it should. But at the end of the day, it's all about that satisfaction of telling a story that people like, and it's kind of addictive. It really is. There's just something appealing about it, and I think when I was a teenager, I probably thought it would make me, more attractive to girls. It didn't work, but but I didn't know that at the time, and so it was, And by the time I figured it out, I think I was probably married by then, and it didn't matter anymore.
Well, JR used to read romance novels because he thought for some reason it would not make him understand girls.
Newsflash, it does not.
That's not newsflash for anybody else other than you.
You hush your mouth. This is why your mother likes me better.
Yes,
All right.
it is why my mother likes you better.
Many authors let their own real-life experiences influence the stories they tell. So were there any specific formidable moments that shaped you as a storyteller, John?
Well, I went to work at the Surgeon General's office about a year before 9/11. And about 6 weeks after that, we had the anthrax letters, followed by any number of disasters and threats and you name it. And so living through those things and seeing people do fantastic things in the field, risking their lives in some cases by going to Africa for the Ebola outbreak 5 years ago. Those are stories that need to be told, and it's a great pleasure to tell.
Absolutely. So what about you, William? Were there any formidable moments that shaped the way you tell stories?
The way I tell stories, that's an interesting question. Yes, I think there was. It actually happened fairly recently. When I was in college, I was taught, like I would say most people who take creative writing in college are, that what matters most is the prose itself, sentence structure, imagery, the type of wording you use, that kind of thing. Story and narrative were secondary. Now, I was told if you turn in a fantasy story, I'm going to give you an F. And so we were very restricted on what we were allowed to write, which, looking back on it, should never have been the point. It should have been how to write a story, not what to write. And so I quit writing fiction for a long time until 2014, when I wrote my first published novel and said, I really don't care what anybody thinks anymore. I'm just going to tell it the way I want to tell it.
You're muted, dear.
Yeah, I think my wife got home. I'll let John talk to you for a minute. I'll be back.
So
all right, that's fair. The next set of questions are for John anyway. So, John, we ask all of the people that come on this show who also served in uniform these questions, but your bio mentioned that you retired from the U.S. Public Health Service as a Rear Admiral. So we ask all of our veterans this question, but how do you feel like your time in uniform affects the stories you tell?
Well, every book I've written has had a medical component to it. Sometimes it's been, in the case of the first book I wrote, it was about my great-grandfather who ran away from home in 1849 and went to the California goldfields. So the medical component of that story was based on the practice of medicine in the 1840s in what's basically a pioneer setting. These two new books, Sowing Chaos and Unleashing Chaos, are certainly medical, with all kinds of threats thrown in. So I feel like what I've done all my life is being told in these books. I mentioned earlier about the characters at the Federal Bureau of Prisons. One of my bad guys in an upcoming book is a guy that was known as Duckman. Duckman, when the prison where I worked, the inmates fed wild ducks bread after meals. And so the ducks would just come in there by the hundreds. And Duckman would put a duck inside his coat and carry it around all the time. And one day he decided he was going to bring it to the pharmacy and push it through the window. And I heard about it, thank goodness, ahead of time, but there were about 20 inmates that came in there looking to see what I was going to do with a wild duck running around inside my pharmacy. Well, I told Duckman, I said, if you put the duck in here, I'm going to close the blinds on the window and I'm going to wring the duck's neck. So he left with the duck. But Duckman was a very violent kind of guy, if left to his own devices. So his personality came out in this upcoming book.
Okay. That's deeper than I thought it would go, but we'll take it.
I feel bad for the duck.
Well, they saved the duck, so
Yeah. I mean, it could have been much worse, but yeah.
So do you ever, well, you actually answered, you do draw on the people you knew. Do you just draw on the inmates or do you draw on some of the other employees?
I have all kinds of heroes in my stories that I also worked with. In fact, my primary hero in these two books is a nurse officer from the Public Health Service. She was also in the Army, in Public Health Service, academia, and now she's a volunteer. She's deployed 49 times, either in uniform or as a volunteer. So she's a hero, and I'm happy to tell her story.
Wow, that's a lot of deployment time.
Yeah.
So
they're not 6 month deployments generally. They're weeks, but still 41 of them.
It's still a lot to just drop your life and go off and do something and then come back.
Her poor family. So we've talked a little bit about how your time in uniform affects the stories as you tell them, but do you feel like it affects how you engage with content as a reader, as a consumer?
Well, I read a lot. I read 30 to 40 books a year, and I usually read the kinds of things that appeal to me and my background and my education and my experience.
Okay. So we'll take that as a yes. So the last question. So I noticed it said you retired as a Rear Admiral, and I know the U.S. Health Service is considered a uniform service, but is it considered military?
It is not.
Okay.
And that is a bone of contention. The U.S. Public Health Service was created by John Adams.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's how old it is. It's one of the oldest services, but it has always been a more or less a domestic service, although that we deploy internationally frequently and have been deployed in wartime. We're not generally armed.
Okay. Well, I just know when I see you guys, I see some of the Surgeon General types on the news, it looks like they're wearing Navy uniforms. So it's always a little confused on how that all works.
Yeah, it's a sea service.
Mm-hmm. I worked with a captain who had been in the Uniformed Health Service, and then not really sure how she ended up in the Army, but she was a not preventive medicine, but she did she wasn't an MD, but she did stuff with preventive medicine, and so like she was interesting. Captain Ortiz was a very interesting woman. So, but that was the first time that I'd ever heard of it. Really, I think was when I was in the Army. So she loved it. She left active duty and went back to the Uniformed Health Service, but I think she wanted to be in the Army for a while. So,
lots of people are moved back and forth from one service to another. I know people who have been in 3 different services by the time they retire.
Yeah, she said that it was one of the few services where you can switch between different branches pretty fluidly.
Well,
so it's like nobody wants a Marine after they're done being a Marine.
Every service is going to need somebody in preventive medicine, whether they're armed or not. So, yeah.
So transitioning from some of the writing stuff into things from a more fan angle, have either of you had any cool fan art or somebody cosplay a character?
Well, one of the coolest things that ever happened was Hit World is my creation, and Marie. That's one of the books Marisa and I are writing together. And so there's my co-creator Larry Hoy was at Fantasy this year, and sent me a photo on Facebook, and it's of a badge from Hit World, where our shooters, our hitmen. Hit World is about a world where you think of it as John Wick, only he's got a license to do what he does, and everything is regulated by the government. All assassinations and hits come through the government, so they get their share. And there's magic and all that, but you have to have a license to do it, to be a shooter, and you have a badge that goes along with it. And at Fantasy this year, somebody was cosplaying that badge, and I was stunned. And then they sent me one. I've got badge number 1, and so I just thought that is so freaking cool. And now we've had a bunch of other fans order their badges, and we're keeping up with who has what number and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
That sounds very cool and also very organized.
Yeah, which is why I'm not in charge.
How about you, John?
No, nobody wants to copy me.
You never know. I've seen some people cosplaying coronavirus, baby.
John's too modest to tell you. He has another series that he created. That and yeah, we're talking about sowing chaos and unleashing chaos. But he has a series about a young lady who is is she Creole, John?
Creole.
She's Creole, and she has an amulet that allows her to talk to the dead.
And he's going to be coming on in like a month or two to talk about that one, right, John?
That would be great, but
they'll just throw you under the bus.
Book. It's not a new book. It's been out a couple of years.
Doesn't need to be a new book.
And there's 2 of them.
Need to be a new book.
There's 2.
Good. Then go write the 3rd, and we'll do it when the 3rd comes out. There you go. See, look, I'm not bossy. I swear.
Super.
Lies.
I'm not a director. I'm a dictator. Get it straight. No.
But a benevolent one.
I try. So, has anyone asked you for your autograph out in public, or like
all the time at the bank?
Yeah, I was going to ask if you mean outside of cops, but
well, ideally outside of cops, but
he just likes to make donations to the Police Benevolent Association, one citation at a time.
It's true. Not in my case. They have not. No, which is fine. I'm not a. If that ever happened, I would probably question, their sanity or taste.
Fair
Although,
enough.
I can tell you a story about being mistaken for someone and how I got a free meal.
Okay.
So when I was younger, I looked a lot like Donald Sutherland.
Okay.
And we were eating at a restaurant in Nashville once, and the waitress came over, and you could just tell she thought I was Donald Sutherland. And finally, I just look at her and I go, no, it happens all the time. I'm his oldest son. I'm Kiefer's older brother, and I'm not an actor or anything. I just look like the family. So the manager comped me a free meal. And then I told him, I said, I'm just kidding, really. But they gave me the meal anyway, just because it was a good story.
And I'm sure they'll tell all the people that came in that they ate there, whether they did or not at this point.
Oh, sure, of course,
So
we loved our pie.
Well, I mean, who doesn't love pie?
This is true.
So
wait, this is you, Doc. Are we talking mathematical number, or are you talking about the actual edible?
Pie.
Oh, you're talking about the booze. Okay, let's move on.
I was drinking pie.
Ask John. I'm going to go the next question. I'm going to go duct tape a Labrador's mouth closed.
Normally it's Elvis. We totally understand here. We're dog friendly.
Okay. So have you spotted somebody reading one of your books out in the wild?
No,
John?
I think these last two books, I think people probably read those things at home at night with a cover pulled over their head. Because
Only if you're doing it right.
Pardon me?
Only if you're doing it right.
They're a little bit scary.
So we know that Clancy wrote similar themes in his stories, and then he had the FBI follow him because they were convinced somebody was leaking information to him. So have you had the FBI call you up and be like, John, do we need to talk?
You know, my searches online, I am amazed that the FBI hasn't been sitting on my doorstep, but not yet.
I had one cop that I met whose wife wrote more risque romance novel, shall we call it? And he told me jokingly when we met at a Starbucks that if you weren't at least on one government watch list as an author, you weren't doing it right. So
that is fair. I guess maybe I don't know. So
in my defense, I wasn't really planning murder.
Any weird or fan interaction? What?
No, you go ahead. I was making a joke that you just walked all over it, so we'll move on.
That's fine. I walk all over you all the time. You seem to like it. Oh,
I got nothing.
There's going to be somebody in our audience who's like a therapist who wonders what's wrong with you. Okay.
Well, if they're wondering that now, they're not a regular listener anyway.
This is also true. Although we did have one guest come on that actually trained to be a counselor, and then she decided people sucked, so she wrote paranormal anyway. So we actually joked about having like a co-host therapy session as a joking episode, but that just might open us up to liability. So we decided we're gonna have to pass.
That's because you don't want Jennifer being the therapist because you know
she doesn't like me. She's a little bit scary. So we'll move on.
Which Jennifer?
Blackstream?
You might know her.
I don't know her.
She writes witches and vampires and stuff.
Yeah, because if you write a witch and a vampire, you get a secret club membership, so you all know each other. No, it's not like that.
They get a decoder ring. I heard about it. It's in their Ovaltine drinks.
So she's awesome, but she can be a little intense. But I love her. She's a tiny person. You just add in the right magic water, and she'll shoot up to match her personality.
Wow.
So you just called her a gnome. Okay, I hope she listens, and we'll move on.
I think this is smaller than a gnome, but okay.
I'll be fine.
All right, while she's trying to recover,
I'll be fine.
While she's trying to recover from sticking her foot in the mouth, I'm going to ask the next question. So, what is the funniest or weirdest interaction that you've had with listeners or readers since you started writing? Hopefully, it's family friendly, and we'll go with you, William.
You mean weirdest
or funniest? Just entertaining anecdote with a fan.
So there was this one time when Yvonne yelled at him. No.
Boy, one. I'm one. I tell you what the funniest was. So I have a series that's my fantasy series, and it has a dragon on the cover, the first one, because it's kind of required. You got to have a dragon on the cover. And I was at a festival with a bunch of families, and this was out kind of in the country. And they would be walking by, parents with the kids, and you could just tell the teenager kids, they didn't really want to be there. They're like, I don't, what are we doing? But they walk by, and 10 families walked by, and I asked every one of them. I watched, and I said, do y'all read? Do your kids read? Oh, yeah, not really. No, they don't read. And 10 out of the 10, I looked at them, and I looked at the girl, and I said, you really like fantasy books, don't you? And they were all teenagers, and they're like, yes. And their parents, you do? and I would look at the guys and say, and you guys like, y'all are easy. Y'all want to go play a video game. Oh yeah, but the girls, all of them really liked fantasy, and none of their parents knew it. They loved to read, but their parents didn't know it because I don't know whether the girls didn't do it around their parents because of some disapproval of the subject. I don't know why, but it was just funny to me that I was able to tell that just from them looking at the books as they walked by, that they really liked it and they really wanted to go look at them and all that. And wound up selling a bunch of books to the parents who just looked at them and said, well, if you're going to read it, is this, friendly enough for their age? I said, yeah, that's why. So I don't know if that qualifies for what you asked, but that's the first thing that came to mind.
No, I think that qualifies great.
It's amazing the disconnect, especially in today's world where the parents aren't really sure what their kids are doing. And as long as they're being quiet about it, they may not care.
See, I'm a mom, but I'm maybe I'm just not trusting. The quieter my child is, the more I want to know what they're doing.
Yeah, and how? Well, I'm not going to ask that, but
I have a boy, so.
Well, I've had both. Okay, and my girl, when I could hear her, that's when there was a problem.
Oh no!
Normally, she was just.
No, even my mom will tell you that the quieter I was, probably the bigger trouble I was getting into.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's amazing how many kids these days really do. I didn't mean to get off on this serious tangent. It's very out of character. But it is amazing how many kids really do enjoy reading today. It's very encouraging.
Well, I think we have a lot of more selection of, or not, I don't want to say more selection. I want to say easier to find books. And there's more access to books than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that is great. I love seeing it as a reader, as a person who curates stuff, as a podcaster, the increased ability to ease of any kind of content. So,
I remember.
Any kind of content also means I want to control my son.
This is fair, but we got to fix your Wi-Fi because it's freezing this. But I remember for years as a kid, I didn't read, and it wasn't because I didn't want to. It's just the books that I wanted to read I'd already read, and there wasn't a lot of content geared towards that. I think the one good thing that came out of like the whole Kindle revolution with the independent movement is that books that were too niche for New York to pick them up because their ROI is so steep because their overhead is so high are getting written. But it also means you're drowned in content, so sometimes it can be hard to find what you're looking for because there's just so much out there. But what a problem to have.
I never had that problem. I just stole my mother's books.
The strangest thing, my parents, and I didn't mean to usurp John's answer. My parents were not readers. They didn't have anything. And when my mom died, the only novel in her entire collection was a first edition of Casino Royale. And which is quite a valuable book. And it's the only novel she had, and she never read it. She didn't like James Bond. I don't know what that was apropos for, but
maybe it had stunning cover art. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
you never know.
So what about you, John? Have you had any weird or funny interactions with fans since you started writing?
Well, this Sowing Chaos, the main bad guy in this book is Kim Jong-un from North Korea, accompanied by his nutty sister. And I got into a long discussion with a reader about what his real motives were. And I'm thinking, neither one of us have any clue whatsoever what his real motives are, and he probably doesn't either. But anyway,
that's fair.
People have an opinion about literally everything, and if they know a little bit, all of a sudden they want to talk about it.
This is fair. All right, so this is the part of the interview where we talk about everything you guys have written. So, John, can you give us the Reader's Digest version of what you've written?
Well, I've got a short list. Orphan Hero, story about my great-grandfather that I mentioned earlier. My great aunt told me she wanted me to do 3 things in life. She wanted me to be a Baptist preacher, a Democrat congressman, and write a book about my great-grandfather. So I got one done.
You still got time to get the rest of it.
Next book was Voices of the Dead. It's a story about the yellow fever epidemic in 1878 that wiped out 20,000 people in the South along the Mississippi River bottoms. And one of the characters was, as Bill mentioned, a Creole nurse who came from New Orleans to Memphis to volunteer. Well, the next book, our publisher said, you got to keep that character and write another book. So I took her back to New Orleans, and she got in the midst of a murder mystery that she solved in 1880 New Orleans. And then books 4 and 5, Sowing Chaos, Unleashing Chaos, and 6, right on the last chapter, Bill.
Good.
Trafficking Chaos. So
Good. I didn't want to pull out my whip.
Okay. That kind of dough.
Bill's got half a library.
All
John,
right,
John didn't tell you he's also got 2 other novels finished in my universe that can't come out till I get off my butt and write a certain book.
fair.
I didn't want to mention that.
So, William, can you give us the highlights reel of everything you've written?
Sure. The Last Brigade Universe is the series that got me, I don't know, published anyway, and it's turned out to be fairly popular. And it just a really brief. The U.S. has been putting people as they get out of the service who have skills that are not easily replicated, but people who have no family or nowhere to go, nothing really to do, they're recruiting them to go into cryogenic sleep against the day they might be needed again. And when they are finally awakened by accident, it's 50 years later and the U.S. is no more. So they have to try and rebuild it. But there are warlords. The cartels run Mexico. The Chinese
kind of run it now.
Well, yeah. So it's that part. It's like John said. There's not a lot of fiction here other than the cryogenics. The Chinese are in California. So that's the main series. I did create Hit World, and that is now going into book. The book I'm writing with Marisa is book 6. We have an anthology turned in. I have written in the Four Horsemen universe. I have another series called Time Wars that I'm going to be getting going next year. I just finished a novella in Jerry Pournelle's Codominium universe.
Oh.
The one with Moat and God's Eye and War World and all those. So I write in quite a few different things. And then I have a fantasy series that I was with one publisher, and it looks like it's now going to be with another. And so, and that doesn't even begin to mention the nonfiction stuff.
All right. Well, then we will link to your Amazon page. So if people want to check it out, they can just click that buy all button. And for the life of me, I don't know why Amazon doesn't add that on an author page, because it'd be very helpful. Because there are just some authors that you're like, yep, I just want all of it.
Yes. Roger Zelazny.
That's right up there. All right. So those all sound fascinating, but today we're going to talk about Sowing Chaos, a Last Brigade prequel series. This is the first book in the Collapse series, which is, like we said, the prequel. So from here on out, either one of you can answer. So it'll be directed at both of you collectively. Oh. He's showing us the cover for a second. We'll get that. I've got it to share on the screen as well. But where did the premise for this, for the concept of the prequels come from? How did you guys come up with the ideas?
Well, Bill asked me a question. How did the United States get into this situation of having to put its soldiers to sleep and awaken them 50 years later. And he said, can you write material that will convince people that this is how America went from the most successful country in the world to a completely collapsed country. And so that's what Sowing Chaos, followed by Unleashing Chaos, followed by Trafficking Chaos. And Trafficking Chaos goes down so far that young girls and young women are being used as collateral because money is worth nothing by this time. So we've got 2 more books coming in that series before it gets to Bill's Lost Brigade universe, or Last Brigade universe.
Okay. All right. So before we dig in, we want to talk about this lovely cover. So how what's the story of this piece of art? How did you guys make this happen?
Bill gets all the credit for that. I don't know how in the world
here's the story John's just forgotten. So he came up with a cover that I didn't like the cover he did, but I liked the concept. And so I started looking around and started thinking, and no, I'm trying to remember exactly. These things go through so many iterations. But anyway, we decided that since a nuclear weapon it goes off, that we needed to have it on the cover, and nothing represents America more than the Statue of Liberty. And on the first, this kind of ties into the first book in the Last Brigade series, because on that one, there's a picture, there's a lot of images, but one of them is of the Statue of Liberty looking very similar to this one in collapse mode. It's falling over. So representative of what the series is about, I looked at it and I said, this would be one reason that the Statue of Liberty would be falling on that cover. So there is a tie into the regular series. Okay. But yes, I designed that cover.
Looks good.
Thank you.
All right, Doc, save us from ourselves.
Well, I think they've kind of given us the 30-second elevator pitch already. So
it does sound like it. They're thorough.
Yeah.
With that.
Yeah, I'll only put it to you this way. From my standpoint, the way this happened was I looked at John Babb and I said, okay, this man he's a writer and he has experience beyond which most people will ever dream of. He has expertise that would take someone else months, if not years, to research and get right. And since he's naive enough to want to write in my universe, I'm not about to tell him no. And so I said, hey, John, why don't you write these books? And he said, okay. And that's kind of how it happened.
Well, then you should take care of him. When we leave the naive sheep into the pasture, we take care of them.
We do. John is a remarkable man. And in all seriousness, when he said, he would like to do this, then it would have just been the height of folly to say no.
That's a good point. So far, it sounds like you guys are doing amazing things.
Oh, we try.
So which tropes, though, do you think that this book actually hit probably the best in the breaking down the universe type things?
John?
Well, it's a thriller. It is a political thriller. I like to think that it's a little bit different from other books of this genre because it is not just one event, not just one catastrophe. It's about 40. But they are such that they just make society almost overwhelmingly unbearable.
Okay.
Yeah, the tropes. I'm trying to think of it. One thing about the book is it's pretty relentless in um, in it, and it's funny because it's relentless, and yet John is not a relentless type of writer. John is a very matter of fact type of writer, very different than me in style, and yet he's presenting just attack after attack, and all things that he trained to counter. This is all coming straight out of his experience, or most of it anyway, and so it's hitting all those tropes of um, relentless attacks and trying to prevent the next one in a way that I'm not sure has been done very often. And I'm not sure that there's very many people that could have done it, because you don't replicate the experiences he's got easily.
No, it takes a very specific kind of background for that. So, which I think is really fascinating and really awesome that he decided to write this and book. So normally ask about genres and subgenres. Would this hit the military sci-fi genre? It seems like urban sci-fi, but
It's sci-fi in that when I wrote The Last Brigade, it would be what I would call borderline sci-fi, okay? Because it does have cryogenics and it does take place in the future. So in that regard, it's science fiction. But the technology that's in it is all current. It's maybe inflated a little. I have a super Apache called a Comanche gunship, and things like that. But it's all technology that could exist.
Yeah, which is really one of those hallmarks of urban sci-fi, is that it's stuff very close to plausible and very not too far removed from our current tech. Most of it's similar and overlapping.
Exactly.
So
and I would say it fits in sci-fi in that it ties into that series. And then it also ties into, because the Last Brigade universe, not these books, but also has a fantasy element. There are books in the series that are straight out fantasy, but they're marked as fantastic tales in the universe.
Okay.
Who don't like that kind of stuff.
So moving on kind of to the story itself, you've told us a bit about what happens overall in the arc of the story, but can you tell us a bit about the main character, what makes them special and unique?
Well, the main heroic character is the nurse that I spoke of. She is in this book. She is a CIA agent who has a mastery of 6 languages. She's a nurse, and so she's able to work in international environments as that nurse undercover and come up with a whole lot of information. The bad guys are the ones you read about in the newspaper every day. Kim Jong-un, Putin, President Xi, some of our own politicians. An example of a attack mode that wasn't possible up until just a few years ago was a laser-sighted mortar. Mortars were not really all that effective at a long range, as long as you weren't required to hit a specific target or within 15 feet, say, of a specific target. But when you add a laser sight to it, somebody in the crowd that can have a laser sight and spot, I won't say what the event was, but spot a specific target and fire that laser from up to 6 miles. I mean, that mortar from up to 6 miles away. Then all of a sudden you got a really deadly and super dangerous weapon that just cannot be defended. And it did its work.
Wow, that's fun.
So, can you tell us a bit about any of your secondary characters that you have in it?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell us some about the secondary characters in the series? Is there one you want to tell us about? Does Super Nurse have a sidekick? Which I totally think it's awesome using a nurse, because as I was a medic, and so many people ignore the nurses and the medics in the room and say stuff they just forget that we're there.
Now, 4 of my books, nurses are the heroes. I worked with some fantastic nurses, including the one that's the featured hero in this series. Her sidekick is a colonel who's on assignment to Homeland Security, and they have sort of a romantic relationship gradually building over the course of the book. But he's a secondary, but he seems to be around quite a bit. But she's the one that took on most of the danger in this early part of the book through her international deployment.
Okay. Doc, since he answered the question about the bad guys, you get to ask your favorite question about the dark alley.
Oh, wait. Are we doing that one now?
Yeah, he answered the bad guy question already, so no point in having him say it again.
So, my favorite question: if your characters knew who you were and knew you were responsible for all the craziness that happened to them, and they found you in a dark alley, how would you fare?
Well, I could outrun Kim Jong-un. But, I wouldn't fare well with my bad guys, no.
What about you, William?
If my bad guys caught up with me in a dark alley, how would I fare?
Well, it doesn't have to be the bad guys. It's just, how would your characters react if they knew who you were?
Most people answer with their protagonists instead of their antagonists. Like, if the good guys who they tortured met them in a dark alley. But you can answer bad guys too. That's a unique twist. I like where your mind is going.
If my protagonists met me, I would probably be left a bloody lump. But if my antagonists met me, they'd probably buy me a beer.
You let them do better than they did in real life?
I don't believe that bad guys who are just universally awful are particularly interesting. I think you need to be sympathetic toward the bad guys, at least insofar as you try to understand their motivation. It may be horrible, but to them it's not horrible. And so they typically get a more sympathetic reading with me, and then they come out of it looking even worse because of it. But yeah, I think they'd look at me and go, come on, man, I'll buy you a beer. I may knife you after we get done, but I'll buy you a beer first.
Well, John, how do you think your nurse would respond if she knew that you were responsible for all the craziness and danger she gets put in?
Knowing her, she would eat it up. she's just that tough.
Since this character was based off of a nurse you knew, are you going to tell her and give her a copy of the book?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. She's one of my beta readers.
Oh, cool. JR.
It would help if I didn't do the boomer thing and leave it muted. So finally, you've told us a little bit about the Last Brigade universe, but so we want to narrow this down specifically about the universe as it happens during the Collapse series. So what can you tell us about the world as it stands when you're writing the prequels, without giving any spoilers, obviously?
Well, the entire world is going to be affected if America collapses. Everything is so interconnected now, economy-wise, that if the dollar fails, then the ruble fails, the pound sterling fails. Everything is interconnected. If the bad guys are interfering with the oil markets, it's just inevitable that if something this dramatic happened to America, the whole world would suffer.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they're going to try and take advantage of it too. But at the same time, there's not going to be enough resources left to go around. So a majority of the population is going to die.
I have heard the theory posited that if something happened that catastrophic, there would be no recovering because all of the easily accessible resources have already been claimed, and without the tech, you can't get the stuff. Like fracking doesn't happen without modern tech. I don't know how true that is because I've heard some of those places they said the resources were depleted have refilled. And I am not a geologist or an environmental scientist, but it's definitely an interesting question to think about.
Nobody has ever mistaken you for a scientist, JR.
I can wave my hands with the best of them.
The overall and overarching thing about it is that if something catastrophic happens to the U.S., which, this is about the collapse of the U.S., so it does. One of the first things that's going to go is money. What value does money have if things aren't being shipped anymore? And everything is so balanced on a knife edge, like John said, and it's so interconnected that the money we use only represents an idea. In and of itself, it has no value.
Yeah,
and so you would quickly reach a point where things become more valuable than what a piece of paper that represents what we consider wealth. And if that rippled across the entire world, it's going to be pretty dire consequences.
Okay.
So your daily subsistence concerns, you don't have any fuel. You're trying to find enough food for your family. If you've got a gun, if you've got anything worth possessing, if you've got a pretty wife, if you've got a pretty daughter, all those things have to be defended in this kind of a world because they're worth something to other people.
Yeah, they have an intrinsic value.
Yeah.
Okay. There's an interesting, and if I can find it, I'll link it in the YouTube. I'll link it in the comments on YouTube and on the podcast, dear listener. But there's actually a YouTube channel that breaks down some of the science behind this kind of stuff. Like, if you knew what you were doing, how long could you live and survive off the food in a grocery store, for instance? And everyone thinks, well, everything will spoil. But with enough salt, if you knew everything was going bad, you could salt that meat and preserve all of that. There'd be enough in the grocery store. You could plant some of the stuff in the store. So it's an interesting thing to think about. Although I just hole up in the Walmart because they got books and supplies. So, if I'm going to ride out the apocalypse, I can read to the end. So Sowing Chaos is clearly part of the series. We know because you told us so, and it says so on the Amazons. There are currently 2 books out in this series, but you've mentioned more. So is their story done? Like, what do you see coming from these characters in this series?
Some of the same characters follow through the entire series. It gets worse. I can tell you that it gets worse until Bill's cryogenic army wakes up and begins to fight back.
Okay.
Yeah, the world goes away. And this is the details of how that happened. And the prequels were written basically on demand because people wanted to know what happened. So this is that history.
Okay. So once you link up on the timeline with the last Brigade series, do you think you're going to have overlap and let the characters interact, or is it that ship sailed? It's already too late.
Well, they actually will. John's already finished a book in which they do more or less make contact. And there are other stories in the anthologies. The anthologies have stories that occur throughout. They don't just occur in this series and then in the 50 years from now in the Last Brigade series. These are occurring throughout that in-between period, too. And in one of those stories that's going to be coming out soon, they are actually going to touch base with a portion of the 7th Cavalry Brigade, which is in the Last Brigade universe, not the regiment, the brigade. So yeah, it's all going to eventually be completely interconnected.
Okay.
In fact, just one more thing, there is a foreign anthology coming next year, and in a number of the writers actually are native to those countries. The first story's already turned in from Argentina, and it's about what happens in those countries when things happen in the Last Brigade universe.
Wow, how did you finagle that one?
Because people kept asking me, what's going on over in Europe, and I knew the generalities, but what I really wanted to do was find authors, if I could, who were native to that area. And I wasn't able to do that for all of them, but I wanted to find out, okay, I know the general pattern, but tell me what it would have been like to live in France, when Russia attacks Western Europe, for example. And so there's a French author named Antoine Guillard. There's what happens in England. I don't know if you guys know Tim C. Taylor.
I do.
Okay. Well, Tim's
right. My first publishing contract.
Oh, awesome. Well, Tim is doing the story for England.
Okay.
And there's Jan, and he would kill me because I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but I think it's Kotuch or something like that in the Czech Republic. And he's a military SF author who lives there. He's doing that. So we're going to be getting perspectives from all over the world. So that it's not just a U.S.-centric series.
So how did you meet those authors, or did they come to you?
I reached out to them. As you can probably tell, I'm not exactly afraid
He's
to
so
talk.
shy.
I am. It's true.
It's a real problem.
I know. And I just ask people because I really am a pretty nice guy. I don't usually bite, and I just asked them, and I think the first anthology was extremely successful, and so and for anthologies that's not always the norm, and so I think that had something to do with it too, that it would be worth spending your time doing.
All right, Doc. Next set is yours.
Yee-hee! Sorry. Seemed appropriate.
Poland does get sacked, by the way. Yes.
So other than the cryogenics, is there any other tech that you guys developed for destroying the world?
What?
Developed, no. But
everything
is accurate. For example, in this second book, Unleashing Chaos, part of the story has to do with spreading smallpox and Marburg virus. Now, there are only two places in the world where those two items are stored.
Yes.
That's at the CDC and at Vector in Russia. So I won't tell you how that happened, but I had a good friend at CDC who gave me an up-to-date story about the drugs that were being used in case there was a smallpox outbreak or in case there was a Marburg outbreak. Because they're both so deadly, they can't treat or they can't test them on people. They can only test them on macaque monkeys and then extrapolate that and hope that they will also be successful on people. So they've found their way into the CDC's drug stockpile in case those diseases are spread. So those 3 drugs were added in June of this year. That's how up to date this stuff has to be.
As far as the Last Brigade books in themselves, the tech doesn't exist. Big helicopter, that's low-hanging fruit. But there are some things that DARPA has been working on that they may not have perfected, but they're definitely working on them, that I then said, okay, they perfected them and they did this with them. For example, in the first book, DARPA has been working on homing bullets. And so I had them perfect a very small supply, but of homing 120 millimeter rounds for an M1 Abrams. And but there's other things that do exist that most people don't know exist. For example, that the M1 has canister shot. Just like in the Civil War, you fire a cannon and you've got this canister shot for anti-infantry and suppression purposes.
I just want to take and thank a handful of people.
Huh?
Oh, no. He's got, I think he was, there's a playback on his side. Ignore JR.
Okay.
Everybody does.
Yeah, my computer doesn't like me sometimes. It's starting to overheat, but it's okay. It'll survive the podcast, and that's all we really need.
Okay. Anyway, so there's a lot of that kind of stuff. It's not really science fiction-y, but it is maybe taking existing tech beyond where it is today. Mm-hmm. And there are some things that stretch your stretch credulity.
So is there anything that is on that stretch that you would want to use on a daily basis now?
Yes, I'd love to be able to shoot a 50 caliber Desert Eagle without breaking my wrist. But I'd love to have homing bullets, but not that I can think of. Other than just, it would be fun to blow stuff up.
That counts.
Oh, okay. Well, then in that case, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Just give me a target and buy me the ammo, and let me have at it.
Okay.
All right. Well, since it doesn't sound like you have aliens, we're going to move to the wrap-up page, and this one went a little bit long, so we appreciate you bearing with us, dear listener. As we're winding down, was there anything about the Sowing Chaos book or the Chaos series in general that we didn't ask that you wanted to tell us before we wrap up? John or William?
I'll let John start.
I think we've covered just about everything that I want to tell without somebody buying the book out of curiosity. I don't want to solve all the questions.
I'll tell you this much. The only feedback we've gotten that was not 100% positive was that the book scared people to death. And because it is extremely realistic and possible. This isn't, that's the worst part about this, is that it's all intensely possible. And so if you really want to enjoy reading, very well written novels that also deal with, real life, ripped out of the headlines kind of stuff, I think these would be them.
Okay. Well, this is the part of the interview, dear listener. We'll remind you that your reviews matter. So please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right books, and life is too short to read bad ones. So do your part. And with that said, John, how can listeners find you? And as usual, it'll be linked in the show notes.
JohnBabbAuthor.com. My website. That's the easiest way.
All right, we'll link to that and his Amazon page. And since they don't have a buy all button yet, you're gonna have to do some clicking. But he would like you to buy them. All right, William, how can listeners find you?
If you want to keep up with writing tips and new content before it's released, things like that, you can follow me on Patreon at patreon.com, William Allen Webb. I'm on Facebook at The Worlds of William Allen Webb is the name of the page. And you can find me on Twitter at Join the Brigade 1. And you can find me on Amazon, of course. And that's probably about it. I don't think they put me in the phone book anymore. So that's probably all we've got.
I don't think they print the phone book anymore.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah.
All right. And you can find us. Let me start that again because I had to close the door so Elvis didn't go attack the sleeping child. All right. So you can find us on our website at anchor.fm/blasters tack and tack blades, anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades, Twitter at SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot_fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. We promise we will make Doc answer those emails and send you all the love through the digital. No, she's shaking her head. All right. We have the Facebook group where all the shenanigans happen, which is facebook.com/groups/blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, Blasters and Blades Podcast over there on the Facebooks. You can support the show at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it's for the podcast. You can also support the podcast over on anchor.fm/blasters tack and tack blades. Make sure that when you do, again, you tell them it's for the podcast, and we will keep Doc, Cisca, and Nick Garber duly intoxicated. They will drink until their liver surrenders.
Never surrender.
And her cup is empty, so people get on the ball. All right, Doc, bring it home.
Thank you for calling. Damn. Yeah, you threw me off.
I would think the 12th booze threw you off.
This is the best part of the show.
Anyways, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For the absentee Nick Garber, J.R. Handley, I'm Cisca. This was a Blasters and Blade podcast. We'll be back next week, same time, same place, indulging our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, picking on JR, and seeing what crazy drink I will be drinking next. Oh, plus all things that go boom and pineapple on pizza.
Pineapple on pizza, I couldn't let that slide. And if you have drink recommendations,
pineapple on pizza is glorious.
You're a heathen. If you have drink recommendations for Cisca as we try to get her snookered to podcast intoxicated, just send the recipes and we might even get her to try it on air. This could be that kind of show. I don't know. I don't know if her liver's that strong. We will see. But in the meantime, pineapple does not belong on pizza. And let's see if I can beat her to the